Welcome to another episode of the Eric and Mark Show, Playground Rules Phenomenon. We're in for a treat today. We have a special guest, Danny, who is an attorney in the public sector. The judicial legal system can be an overwhelming playground, even more so than other adult organizations because of its rules, procedures, and decorum intertwined with the complex social dynamic between all parties involved. The hierarchy in a courtroom is complex because not only is there a playground executive, the judge, there are also others who hold quasi-executive status as their interjections, when well placed, can have a tremendous impact on the outcome. Danny's role in our playground analogy would be called the playground liaison, who is in place to give guidance and advice to the defendants who ask for his help and qualify. These defendants will be referred to as the new kid on the playground hereinafter. Wouldn't it be nice if all playgrounds had an older, wiser kid willing to help newcomers feel welcome and understand where the bounds are? As our usual disclaimer goes, none of our episodes are intended to defame any employer, whistleblow, or present conspiracy theories. Instead, we aim to ultimately show that the playground rules phenomenon exists in all human organizations, and through the lens of each person on this show, gain insight on the particulars of each playground setting, what to expect and how to navigate through them should we find ourselves in that position. Mark and Danny, how are you guys doing tonight?
Danny, thank you so much for joining us today. We're glad to have you and to get a fresh perspective on things.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you so much, Mark and Eric, for inviting me to do this. I've listened to your podcast before. I think what you guys do is great, and I am very, very excited to be part of it. So, Mark, as you said, my name is Danny. I am an attorney. I'm a newly barred attorney. August will mark my 1-year anniversary of practicing law, so I'm pretty new at it, but I have been working as a public defender for that whole year period, and I'm very, very excited to be able to share my experience and kind of discuss the way that my work interplays with the analogy that you guys have been working with, which is the playground. I'm just very excited to be here, so thank you again for having me.
We're excited to have you. And there's a lot of things that we talk about with the playground, as Eric has talked about before. And just for the people who are new to our podcast, so the playground is essentially an analogy, as Danny mentioned, or a metaphor. And we look at situations where people in a position of advantage, there are people who are in a position of advantage and they take place of that position of advantage, and the people who are disadvantaged, and they have to, unfortunately, in certain cases, they are either victimized or at a major disadvantage from the standpoint of not a level playing field, and everyone in between. We have all kinds of people, right? Facilitators. We have people who we can call enablers. People who are just kind of on standby, watching the whole thing take place. So Eric is the author of this concept, and he inspired me very much with this concept. It's been an important thing that we've discussed for a while now, and our podcast is still pretty new. So again, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please like and subscribe. Eric, so you want to start off with your questions, so let's get going.
Yeah, I'm trying to be too lengthy and wordy, but here is a question I have at a glance. So, Danny, what is the perception that you have gathered of this social phenomenon of the playground rules and how it plays out in the legal field and in the courtroom?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of thinking about the legal field as a playground and kind of what that looks like, and I think I've kind of sorted it out in a way I hope will make sense. The first kind of observation or remark I have is that when I've heard you guys talk about the playground rules and the playground dynamics, it's often in reference to professional spaces, things like that, and oftentimes those playgrounds, as you discuss them, are playgrounds that people want to be involved in. If it's a professional space, someone wants to be there for financial reasons or for professional reasons. So it's always someone trying to get into the playground, interact with the fellow kids on the playground in a way that's going to advance them. There's some interest there in doing that. But what I think is unique about the legal field and how it sort of fits into this analogy is the legal field is a playground that oftentimes people don't really want to be a part of. It's kind of a playground that you go to when you weren't able to follow the rules on the other kinds of playgrounds, right? And so in that sense, I think it's very unique because all of the kids that are on that playground are there presumably because they've done something wrong. And so I've been thinking about kind of the different players on the legal playground and what they look like. And I think there are kind of the three main actors or the three main people on the playground that kind of shape the dynamics. And I'll express that briefly, and then I'll make sure I've answered your question appropriately. But essentially you have the judge, the prosecutor, and the defense attorney. And if I'm following your analogy, the judge is sort of the playground enforcer. They're the one who's there to make sure that whatever rules there are for the playground, that they are followed and that they are applied. The defense attorney, whether that's a private defense attorney that someone hires on their own or a public defender that's appointed to represent someone, that person is very much the playground liaison. They're there to help the new kids that are showing up on this playground who, again, probably don't necessarily want to be there but have to be there. That person is there to be a liaison to kind of introduce them and guide them through the dynamics of that playground, teach them the rules, teach them the game, and help them play it. And then you have the prosecutor, and I've done some thinking about this, and I think the best analogy I can come up with for a prosecutor is they're kind of the hall monitor or the playground monitor. You know, they're the kid who has been authorized by the teacher or by the playground executive to kind of keep tabs on things and make the initial decisions on things and decide when a rule has been broken and decide how to start dealing with people who might have broken that playground rule. And so I think it's just a very, very unique dynamic, especially when you consider the analogy that you guys are using. And I think that kind of sums up the way I have come to see the legal field as a playground of sorts. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. You had mentioned the new kid on the playground being the client, and they're the playground that they don't want to be on. Every playground has a rule book. At school, there's you can't push each other, you can't do certain things on the slides and swings. In the courtroom, there are similar rules, of course, minus the swings, but similar rules. What way does the public have to come to an understanding or access that handbook before they get to the courtroom playground? Or is there no such thing that exists?
Yeah, that's always been something that has both fascinated and troubled me about the legal playground, is the rules are widely available. You can get online and you can Google the rules for the legal playground. You can Google the statutes. You can Google the rules of criminal procedure. It's not like these things are necessarily hidden from folks. All this stuff is public information, but it is construed in such a way, it's written in such a way, it is taught and enforced in such a way that it can be very easy to get lost in it because there are so many rules. And so what has always mystified me is, one, how widely available the rules to this playground are for everyone to see, and yet at the same time, how difficult it is for most people, even the playground liaisons and enforcers and hall monitors, to understand and interpret and apply the rules. So, there's not a lot of transparency in the legal field, which is why the advice is to always have a lawyer, is to always, when you get to the playground, make sure you have a liaison who can take you through. Because even though it's all there in front of you and it's all super easy to access, it is just so convoluted and so complicated that it unfortunately necessitates having that liaison there to guide you through, to teach you the rules, to show you the ropes, because there's just so much going on.
Danny, I actually had a question. And thank you for your response on Eric's question. What is the perception of social phenomena such as the playground from a legal standpoint, and how does the law account for imbalances? I always like to talk about imbalances or unjust situations, injustices, no matter who we're talking about, right? Any people from any walk of life. Sometimes people can be discriminated against even if they're too wealthy, right? Or if they're not doing as well financially. So anybody on any extreme side of a spectrum, a person who is American-born, for example, versus a person who came from another country, maybe everybody's experienced some kind of bias or discrimination of some level, no matter what walk of life they're from. Regardless of political affiliation, religious affiliation, ethnic affiliation. So back to my original Question here. What is the perception of social phenomena such as the playground from a legal standpoint? And how does the law account for imbalances in social structures with the work of people such as public defenders? How do we account for those types of imbalances or injustices?
Sure. Well, I guess my first answer to that question would be that it doesn't. And I know that may not be what folks want to hear, but from the outset, just kind of from the initial look at things, the legal field, the legal playground is not meant to be designed to necessarily confront those social phenomena or make up for those differences or for those injustices or for those imbalances, as you put it, Mark. The legal system, as it was designed in our country, and we get our system from the system of English jurisprudence from hundreds of years ago, but the way this was all set up was to be an objective, equally applicable system of rules and laws that you can apply in any situation, that no one is above or below, and that's going to apply to everyone. And there are a lot of people who hold on to that ideal that the law should be blind, justice should be blind. It shouldn't look to imbalances of any kind, that it should just be this sort of cold, unfeeling, objective thing. And I think there are some scenarios where I could get on board with that, or where at least I see why someone might value that in a justice system. But to kind of give a second answer to your question, how has our justice system actually confronted those things, if at all? And I think you really need to look no further than, the position of the public defender, of the playground liaison. I mean, that was kind of our justice system's answer to the concerns that you expressed, Mark, which is there are people who are poor, there are people who do not speak the language of our country, who have cultural differences, who have religious differences, who have barriers that prevent them in a lot of meaningful ways from being able to access or understand the playground. And so our answer, the playground's answer, was to finally decide, hey, there needs to be a playground liaison here to help people through. And that's what we did in this country. I think it was 1963, so it really wasn't that long ago, but that's when the Supreme Court decided the case of Gideon v. Wainwright. And that is the case that essentially says, if you are charged with a crime, if you have to show up on the legal playground against your wishes, as many people unfortunately have to, you are legally and constitutionally entitled to have that liaison there to teach you the games, to teach you the rules, to teach you the dynamics. And like I said, it wasn't that long ago that we decided this. I mean, our system of justice and our legal system has been around for hundreds of years, but it wasn't until 1963 that our country, that our Supreme Court decided to answer those concerns or those questions that you posed, Mark, of how do we address these imbalances? How do we address the poor person, or the person who has these cultural differences, who has difficulty accessing this playground, who has to show up here and has to play our game with us and has to follow our rules? How do we address that person? And I think the answer was, we're going to appoint them a lawyer. We're going to appoint them a liaison to help them. And so I think that has been the biggest response that our justice system has had to those imbalances, even understanding that fundamentally it was not even set up to address those in the first place.
Thank you, and that's a great answer, and thank you for that historical perspective as well. That's the thing that's really beneficial to us and to all of our viewers, or to all of our listeners, to hear about that history. The thing is, though, what's interesting is this: there's always caveats. So, equal justice under the law. Okay, so there's a debatable phrase or that kind of thing. But let's talk about in a perfect world, which we're not living in. Everybody should be entitled equally to have access to all of the same resources, right? And on some level, equal rights under competition, business, whatever, legal protection, etc. But here's what's interesting to me. So let's say, for example, let's put myself on two sides of the spectrum. So one is that I've committed a crime, hypothetically, and I'm a super wealthy guy, let's say, and I may not, because you're a public defender, let's say I want to have you has a great reputation as a public defender, I want to have you represent me. So my understanding is because I don't meet a certain criteria financially in terms of maybe need or whatever, financial need, or financial hardship, I guess we'll use that phrase, that means I'm not entitled to have you as represent me. On the other side of the coin, though, if let's say I do have enough financial hardship, and let's say I'm a person who does not have much in terms of financial means, I'm one of the people who struggles financially. And I want to have you represent me. Again, a public defender is appointed for me. So what ends up happening is that it ends up being a situation of your services are subject to availability, which is understandably so. So in reality, can we say that if we're talking about the best representative, the best representation we want to have for somebody to defend us in our case, and we believe, and a rich person or a poor person believes that's you, it seems like there is some inherent challenges to be able to get somebody like you to represent us, let's say, as a request. It's pretty much either A, like I said, either you're not available to me at all if I make too much money, or B, it's subject to availability if I have enough financial hardship to justify having a public defender. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I think by and large that's true in a lot of ways. And now every jurisdiction handles things differently, and that means every playground has different kind of qualifications or different rules for how you're able to get that playground liaison to help you, especially if you're interested in having a liaison appointed to you, not paying for them. But typically what you'll see happen, what has been my experience, is there are a lot of times where someone shows up on the playground, they're there because they got in trouble and they have to deal with it, and they're trying to navigate it, and they want a liaison to take them through and help them. And they're not in a position to pay big money for a fancy liaison who's been on the playground and he's been on all the teams and he's played all the games and he knows what's going on and he does it his whole, they're not in a position to get that person, but they're also, based on the rules of the playground, whatever one they happen to be in, they're not able to have that playground executive say, hey, you know what, I'll appoint you one, because they don't meet whatever financial qualification is there. But what I will say, what tends to happen is that in those situations, both you as the liaison who is potentially being appointed and the playground executive who is doing the appointing have a lot of discretion in how you assign a liaison or appoint a liaison to help a newcomer to the playground. So what that translates to in my job is someone might come to me and say, I need your help with this, I need a public defender, and I might go through their information and get a financial affidavit from them and say, listen, I would love to help you, but you don't qualify. And the challenge there is, if everyone qualified, we would be, as public defenders, overworked. We wouldn't be able to serve anybody properly or give people the help or the representation that they need. So there has to be a cutoff at some point. And even there are times where someone might not qualify or someone might not meet the standard to have a public defender based on my review of their situation. But, as I said, the playground executive can still say, you know what, this person may not meet the standards as you understand them, but I am still in a position as the executive to say, I'm going to go ahead and appoint you anyway. And that's happened several times in the court that I have practiced in most recently, where I'll have someone who, on paper, doesn't financially qualify for a public defender. But if the court, if the judge finds that they are close enough within, kind of an appropriate range, which again is totally up to the judge, they might say, you know what, I know you don't qualify technically on paper, but given your circumstances or given how close you were to the threshold or to the guideline, I'm going to go ahead and appoint you anyway. So, yes, there are barriers to getting a public defender, and I've had a lot of folks understandably express anger and frustration and consternation when I have to tell them, hey, I'm so sorry, but you don't qualify for a public defender, and they have trouble understanding that, and I get it, because there are a lot of folks in this country who are in this limbo area of they're not meeting the technical poverty guidelines that the government sets out that we use as our qualifier, but they're also not able to go out and not hire an attorney necessarily for every little thing that comes up, even though they have to come to this playground and play by the rules and go through it. So it can be difficult, most certainly, but there are mechanisms in place that can kind of assist people that are in that sort of limbo area. There are also a lot of private attorneys. There are a lot of liaisons who do it for a living, who will show up on the playground to a new kid and say, hey, you know what? I know you can't afford my services. I would charge a lot to lead you through the playground and show you how to play the games. But because of your situation, I'm willing to take you on at a reduced rate, or whatever it is. So there are some things in place that can help those folks who are in that kind of gray area that you expressed.
It's interesting. I'm glad that you're saying about making exceptions. I didn't know that a judge can make exceptions like that, which would lead, hypothetically, that could lead to a whole bunch of other different questions about those exceptions and that kind of thing. And it's up to the judge's discretion, right? Who's close enough to those requirements. But yeah, at the end of the day, if I was a wealthy oligarch, which I'm not, then and I thought you were the best guy for the job, you wouldn't be available to me. That's the bottom line, and that's something that's, I think, important for anybody to know. And that there's probably a lot of different opinions about how that could and should work. But at the end of the day, I think that's one of the ways that the justice or injustice system balances itself, arguably. Eric, what are your thoughts on that?
All very good points and a lot of rabbit holes to go down. Solid question, solid answer. It's the hope of the Eric and Mark show that people come to understand different playgrounds through the eyes of different playground experts. In this case, Danny, you're the playground expert of the courtroom in the legal field. But people oftentimes find themselves, even on a playground they want to be on, they find themselves in situations they don't want to be in. And in our going analogy, we have the judge is the enforcer. And I think a valuable lesson for people to learn on any playground is, how do you, Danny, as a public defender, mediate the difference between if the enforcer has different interpretation of playground rules than you do, without annoying them and upsetting them, and hopefully gaining their support?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. And I mean, even with the caveat that I have not been practicing law all that long, I think that's one of the more apparent things, one of the things that becomes most clear when you see the kind of inner workings of a courtroom is, like Mark pointed out, how much discretion there is with the playground enforcer. And also, as you pointed out, Eric, how even though we have these playground rules in place and they're written down very clearly, that the playground enforcer and the playground monitor and the playground liaison can all have wildly different ideas about what those rules actually mean or how they should be applied. And to answer your question about how do you handle that situation, I mean that is the essence in my mind of being a lawyer, is being able to step into the playground, look at the rules as they're written, listen to the enforcer and the monitor talk about the rules or how they understand the rules, and be able to explain them or argue the rules in a way that works to your new kid's benefit. Because ultimately, as the playground liaison, as the playground expert, you're there to watch out for the new kid who's come in and who needs your help. And it's your job to present the rules or explain the rules or argue the rules in a way that's going to work to their benefit. And sometimes all the time that involves knowing the rules and knowing the law in this case, like the back of your hand. But a lot of it, and I've expressed this before, is not so much the law or knowing the rules, it's just knowing the enforcer. It's knowing the monitor. It's really a people's business, the legal field. It's about knowing people. It's about understanding what's important to them. It's about understanding why they interpret the rules the way they do. Because you could have, a single book of rules. It's all written there very clearly, and the playground executive says, well, you know what? I see it this way. And you have to understand why they see it. You have to ask the why. Why do they see it that way? Because then you understand what's important to them, and you understand what they're looking for and what would ultimately be persuasive to them. And the same thing for the playground monitor. I mean, they're the person who's coming in as the prosecutor in this analogy and saying, hey, we are telling you this newcomer to the playground, he broke the rules of some other playground. That's why he's here. And we want to see him punished for that, him or her punished for that. That's their job as the monitors, to bring that kid in and take them to the enforcer, the executive, the judge of the situation, say, we have someone who we think broke the rules. And so understanding why that person feels that a rule has been broken, and why the playground executive or the judge, might feel that way too, is such an enormous part of being a good attorney, of being a good playground liaison. I would argue even more so than just knowing the rules, which of course is important. You have to know the law, but it's just so much about understanding the people you're interacting with and why they feel the way they do. Because then you know how to argue the rules. You know how to express it or frame it in a way that's going to be persuasive to them, or is going to incline them to do the thing that is ultimately in the newcomer's best interest. So it's just a people game. It really, really is.
All right. Well, thank you. That gives us a pretty good idea. So it's about the law at the end of the day, but at the same time, there is still a part to give a glimpse into people and their lives and relationships too. I mean, of course, the law in the field is the end-all, be-all, but it's nice to know at least there's some level of human consideration, even though that human consideration may not always change the law, right?
Absolutely. It's just such an important consideration.
Yep. Now, let me ask you my next question. I was thinking about this before we started today. What inspired you to work in the field? Were there any social phenomena, such as the playground, that motivated you to pursue your line of work? Was there a time in your life, or in your own life, where you had an unfavorable role in the playground type of setting, but you beat the odds?
Well, I think the biggest decision to get into this kind of work and to pursue this job in particular is, to follow the analogy, is that I came very, very close many times to having to be a newcomer in this playground. I am fortunate that I did not end up on the playground of the legal field, but I can probably count more than 10 fingers the times that I probably should have been dragged in by the playground monitor to this playground and brought before the playground executive and say, hey, this guy broke the rules. We need to do something here. I've been very open about this, and I continue to be, but I had a lot of struggles with drugs and alcohol growing up through middle and high school and certainly into college. I was in inpatient treatment for substance abuse, therapy, 12-step programs, you name it, I did it. And I'm fortunate that I have the health and the life that I do now. But I was given a lot of chances, a lot of second chances and third chances and fourth chances and fifth chances. And to call back to something you mentioned earlier, Mark, the imbalances in our justice system or in the legal playground, a lot of newcomers who show up with those imbalances, with those cultural or financial or economic differences, they don't get those chances. They don't get the second or third chance. They might come onto the playground and the playground executive says, hey, you're done. You're not playing on this playground anymore. And they don't get those opportunities to do more and prove themselves. And I'm fortunate that I did. And so I think a big part of why I wanted to be that playground liaison is because I had so many of those opportunities, and it would be such a waste, I think, to not use what I am able to do now by not helping other people who are in similar positions and who, without my assistance, might not get those other opportunities. So that was a really big factor in why I wanted to go into law, go into this field, but also particularly to be a public defender, to be that playground liaison.
I really like what you said, and you gave us a... I'm sorry, Eric, go ahead. You had something?
Oh, go ahead. Your follow-up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll finish up with my follow-up here. I'm just so inspired by what you said, because that's a side of you that I didn't know. I've spoken with you a couple of times before, but thank you for letting us in on some of your personal challenges and obstacles and some odds that you beat, too. Like you were saying, you had some different struggles, and you went through some different programs and that kind of thing. And I really like, it's actually very inspiring for me, and hopefully it's inspiring for our listeners as well to be able to say, hey, here we are hearing about somebody who wasn't doing so hot, right, a certain number of years ago, was really struggling, and then felt like, okay, well, felt empowered about how they turned it around, and thought that was a good basis to go ahead and to propel like a brand new career forward, right, a life forward, and to go out and help other people. So I think that cause is incredible. I'm very much into to causes and the personal angle on things. And I find what you just shared extremely inspiring, and the fact that you go ahead and try to help other people as well, and teach them through your own sort of hardships, maybe some of your own life lessons. Did you notice when you were growing up, did you notice maybe the schools that you went to, or that kind of thing, or even with the circle of friends that you had that certain people were being treated unfavorably? They're either being any number of things. Somebody was maybe being talked down to, heavily criticized, pushed around. Somebody to school maybe that you went to, or maybe even one of the programs, or any number of places, or that you felt like somebody was overlooked for a qualification. Did you feel like there was anything that you witnessed that's like, hey, you know what, this person is absolutely being treated unfairly, and unbeknownst to you at the time, that was maybe an early indication of the playground phenomenon? Anybody, anyway that happened to you or to anybody that you know that you want to share?
Sure. I don't know if I can think of necessarily a specific or particular example, but I will say that, most of the people that I encountered in my journey in recovery and in sobriety, people who were addicts and alcoholics who were also trying to recover and to, live healthy, normal, happy, productive lives. A lot of those people are the people who maybe necessarily weren't subject to any sort of personal oppression or personal bullying or something like that. But I just keep going back to what you said earlier, Mark, about the imbalances, because so many of those people were most certainly subject to those social pressures, those social phenomena, the social imbalances like lack of income, lack of family support, lack of a friendship network of people who are there for them, who are able to watch over them and support them and assist them. And so in a lot of ways, it's about the larger playground. It's about our social playground. It's about the tools that we are given when we walk onto that big playground in the first place. And most people don't have those things. I mean, I think in a lot of ways the only reason I was able to make it onto that playground in the first place is because I had so much support. I had family, I had friends, I had teachers and community members and extended family, all who were there and supporting me and assisting me through that. And most of the times, people who walk onto the playground, especially the legal field, the legal playground, they don't have those things. And so it's not necessarily that they are, being pushed out or pushed down by someone in particular. It's that their circumstances are kind of doing the pushing. And so I think that's ultimately what I am trying to get at with, why I wanted to do this kind of work is when you go onto that playground, there are people who they just don't have those same things that are available to them. And it makes it that much harder to navigate through the playground and to play the games and to learn the rules and join the teams and whatever else there is, because that's the way their life has been set up, at no fault of their own. That's just the hand they were dealt. And so seeing those experiences, seeing those people, understanding how lucky I was and how privileged I was to have what I have, that I think really, I didn't know to call it a playground at the time, but that I think really keeps me into the idea of this is sort of a playground. There are rules, but not everyone is showing up on the same footing. And I certainly had better footing, and a lot of people I met in those circles that I grew up with, that I was in recovery with, they were not. And I see those echoes in the people that I represent sometimes too. It's like they're coming into this playground and they just don't have the resources. They don't have the support. And that is ultimately the pressure that they're feeling, is those things that they lack. And so to be able to support those people, to help those people, I think is just a tremendous goal, and I've always felt that way.
That's great, and the thing is that I can imagine that people in those roles, maybe some of that kind of work they do on their own with substance abuse or getting counseling or whatever is confidential, but some of it, if it goes out into the open, those people are probably treated with a certain amount of bias and that type of thing. This person could be, maybe people are thinking that they could be subject to like some kind of relapse, right? Or they could be subject to maybe biases that somebody might come across and say, oh, hey, will this person be as reliable and that kind of thing in a relationship, any number of things. So, yeah, I think it's just tremendous to be able to go ahead and be where you were and then to be able to turn it around and to do what you're doing today. I like I said, can't say it enough times, kudos to you, and I hope that's an inspiration to anybody out there who's feeling like they've got nothing left and they're having a really hard time and there's really like no hope. They seem like, and I felt that way a number of years ago myself, and then they listen to somebody like this. It's like, hey, you know what? There's a lot of hope out there, and you can not only can you be successful, you can be proficient at what you do, you can shine, and you can be a real leader. So I think it's great. Eric, what's your take on it?
So I'm formulating a question on the fly, so excuse the lack of eloquence if it surfaces. Danny, you mentioned a couple key points in the courtroom setting. There is the absence of the second and third chance. And additionally, I don't think there's any perfect playground on the planet. Obviously, some things could maybe stand to improve in the courtroom playground setting. As far as the bigger picture, do you think it is necessary that the judge play the role of trying to lower the hammer of the law and the public defender try to find a technicality to afford that second and third chance? Or would there be a benefit, for example, hypothetically, if the enforcer were to think more like a public defender and a public defender would think more like an enforcer?
Well, I think there are a lot of people who would probably feel that the enforcer, the executive, should think more like the public defender, the liaison. And I understand why people feel that way, but there are also a lot of people I've talked to, and I think I may tend to agree with this, is that it's the enforcer's job to enforce. That's what they're there for, and that's an important function. I don't think the executive should be biased towards the liaison or towards the playground monitor. I think a lot of times playground monitors are the ones who become the playground executives or the enforcers, just like, as you can oftentimes see, it's often the prosecutors who become the judges. But I don't think the judge should be biased either way, and I think that's a pretty common, popularly held idea. But I also think it's the judge's job to judge. It's the executive's job to execute, or the enforcer's job to enforce. And I don't think it's the job of the liaison necessarily to find a loophole or to just, figure whatever sneaky way out they can to help the newcomer. I think it's their job, to advocate. I mean, that's why you're there as a playground liaison. You're there to go up to the enforcer, who it's their job to enforce, and say, hey, playground enforcer, I know it's your job to enforce the rules of the playground. I understand that. It's important, and I'm not trying to get in the way of that. But I want you to understand who this newcomer is. I want you to understand why we feel the rules as they're written actually work in their favor, or actually work this way, or why you should enforce the rules this way and not this way. Because as Mark mentioned, as I discussed with him earlier, as he brought up, there's a lot of discretion that the enforcer has. Even if it's their job to enforce the rules, there's so much discretion they have. And so having a good liaison who can advocate to them and say, hey, there's a lot of ways you could enforce this rule here for our playground newcomer. Here's why we think way number 1 rather than 2, 3, 4, or 5 is appropriate here. And a lot of that comes down to, again, understanding the personhood of the enforcer, understanding who they are fundamentally as a person and why they make the decisions they do, what's important to them. It's understanding who the newcomer is, being able to tell their story, being able to express their circumstances to the enforcer. It's knowing the law, knowing the rules of the playground, and being able to advocate persuasively why the rules should be construed one way or another. So I think that the playground enforcer should enforce. The judge should judge. I'm not saying they should necessarily think more like a public defender or more like a playground liaison. I think they have an important job to do. It's certainly a difficult job, and more often than not, it is not a popular decision that they're going to be making, but that's their job to make it. And it's up to the liaison and the monitor to argue their respective positions. And I think ultimately the better lawyer, the better player on the playground should win out. If they are more persuasive, if they're the better advocate, if they are able to make a better argument for their rules or present their position circumstances more clearly, more effectively, I think the judge should make the decision from there.
So the process as it stands, I guess, is everybody plays their role, and that's the best chance the public has or the newcomer has to get in that second chance.
Well, that's the ideal. I mean, obviously the reality is different than the ideal. The ideal is you have the perfectly neutral playground enforcer, perfectly neutral judge who's just there to faithfully apply the laws or the rules of the playground. You have a playground monitor who's there to follow the laws and make sure that they're doing their job correctly. And you have a playground liaison who's there to advocate passionately for the newcomer on the playground. That's the ideal. But the reality, of course, is always different. The reality is, at least in some jurisdictions, the playground enforcer is elected, the judge is elected. They have a constituency to worry about. They have to worry about voters and about keeping their job. As I said, many of these executives and enforcers were former playground monitors. Many judges were former prosecutors. And so it's not a big secret that many of them have, in many ways, more of a leaning towards prosecution or towards that side of things. So even though we have this ideal of every party in their place, every person doing exactly what they're supposed to, in practice it doesn't always work out that way. I think that's ultimately the reality. But maybe there is a time one day when we can get to the ideal where everyone knows their job, everyone does it very, very particularly, and stays true to what their position ultimately is supposed to be. But that could be a ways away. There's no way to know.
Do you think, or are you of the opinion that the newcomer has zero responsibility to understand and know the playground rules, or do they have some onus upon them?
Well, I think the newcomer has every onus to understand and know the rules, and I think that's why it's so important to have the liaison. Anytime someone comes in, particularly in my courtroom as I've seen it, if someone comes in and says, you know what, I don't want the liaison, I want to handle this myself, there is always some admonition or some advisement from the court that's basically like, hey, we're going to hold you to the same standard that we would anybody else, even an attorney, even a liaison. So the burden is 100% on the newcomer to understand the rules and understand the procedures and the people that are involved on the playground. And that's why it's so important to have the liaison who understands those rules, who understands the players on the playground, who knows and understands the executive and the monitor and all of that, because you have to know. The burden is absolutely on you when you walk onto a playground, whether you're prepared or not. And if you're not, it can be disastrous. So it's always, I mean, that's why they always say, get a lawyer. If you're in trouble for something, if you've been accused of something, if it's criminal in nature, get a lawyer, because you need someone there to help you, because you're going to be responsible for it anyway. You might as well have someone who knows what they're doing, who's there to assist you through it.
Good deal. Well, thank you for that elaborate explanation, getting some really, really good information, some interesting perspective from angles that, I certainly don't hear much of. Let's see. Eric, did you have another question, or I can go ahead and I've got one more question for Danny?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, with the few minutes that we have left here, and we are going to have a part two, hopefully after a short intermission here, that we're going to continue with. But before our intermission here, I wanted to ask you one more thing, Danny. How can we give people hope? We know that social structures, such as the playground, can't be changed overnight because they've been built for years, and Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. But what can people in your field do to make others feel like they're being heard and well represented and hope for a better future? How can we chip away at, if not completely defeat this ugly phenomenon called the playground?
Well, I would love to be optimistic and delightfully hopeful, but I don't know that we ever do. I think a big part of this playground in particular, and certainly the importance of the liaison, is that this is not a playground that's going to go away. This is a playground that has been in force and in effect since pretty much the beginning of our country. It is an institution that is so firmly cemented in our way of life and our ideas of how we administer and control society that I don't know that it's going away. But having the liaison, being entitled to a liaison, the promise of Gideon to be Wingright, the case I mentioned earlier. Gideon's promise is also, a training program that is used for certain public defenders. That is something that I think should give people hope. It's very easy to get bogged down or distressed or defeated by this playground because it's very different from most other playgrounds. But knowing that there is this liaison there, even if you can't afford one, there is one who can be appointed to you, who can be there to take you through everything, is, I think, a tremendous thing. And I hope that having that in place, having that institution, having that promise that if you step into this courtroom, if you step onto this playground, you're going to have someone there to help you if you want one. I mean, that's just enormous. Unfortunately, so many people who work as public defenders are overworked, they're tired, they aren't paid enough, they have way too many cases, and that can cause a lot of breakdown, but ultimately they are there to help, they're there to assist, they're there to provide that incredibly necessary service, and I hope that people will just know to take advantage of that if that's something they feel is necessary. If they can't afford an attorney, there's a public defender there, there's a liaison there who can help you. So that is my personal hope, that in and of itself inspires further hope for people who are required to step foot on that playground in the first place.
Thank you very much for that take. And like you said, the playground may never go away completely, but at the same time, we know that it could be worse, so we'll just kind of do our best to come to terms with the reality of things, the hardships that people face, and try to overcome them, because that's the power of being of a human being, of the resolve. At the same time, try to make it more fair, more of a just situation for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that come after them. So it's been a wonderful time. I've enjoyed speaking with both of you today. I very much enjoyed our show for today. Again, please hit the like and subscribe button if you like what we're doing here. We hope that you do, because it means a heck of a lot. Eric, any final thoughts?
No. Final thoughts and a final minute. Just thanking you, Danny, for your time, for the amazing service you give to the public. I'm wondering if you have, I think we have 30 seconds left. What is maybe some advice or some words of hope or encouragement you can give to maybe people that may find themselves as the new kid on this playground?
Well, first of all, thank you, Eric and Mark, both so much for having me on. This has been awesome. I love what you guys do, and this has just been a blast. My parting piece of advice to newcomers is exercise your right to remain silent. Don't talk to the police, and always ask for a lawyer.
10-4, copy that. Very advice.
All right. Thank you, guys. We'll talk to you soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a good night.